So many things have ruined my childhood, so I go online to bitch and cry. It feels like all of Hollywood is up against me. They even made Optimus fly. New versions of what I grew up with are being remade, rebooted and retried. My adolescence is under attack now. I think that a part of me has died. Aliens, Predators, Marvel, DC, maybe it doesn't all quite sing.
Okay, well, except maybe for that Jar Jar Binks.
Could it be I've misunderstood? This podcast ruined my childhood.
Hello everyone and welcome back to This Podcast Ruined My Childhood. I'm Phil Durasmo, and with me again we have my spooky brothers from Other Mothers, Mr. Hunter Fagan and Mr. Andy DiGenova. Gentlemen, say hello to those fine folks out there.
It's a day, so I'm so glad to be back.
Happy November, Friday the 13th, everybody. Good to be back. Thanks, Phil. Hi, Hunter.
Hello!
I'm ready to go to Manhattan. I'm ready to box on a roof.
Friday the 13th, Part 8. Jason takes Manhattan. Now, New York has a new problem.
I mean, nothing is more horrifying than those little flyers you'll get in the mail saying you want a free casino boat cruise. So, like, this movie really captures kind of that experience, and I don't even have to leave my home.
Yeah. So I guess everybody out there has already figured out what we're talking about. But I guess if you haven't figured out what we're talking about, it's probably better on you. But this week we're going to be talking about probably and arguably the best entry into the Friday the 13th franchise, Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. But first, as we always do, we're going to take a step back to those days of our youth when we watched the original Friday the 13th movies and really became fans of the Friday the 13th franchise. So, Andy, why don't you take us back to where you were as a wee little lad watching Friday the 13th for the first time?
Oh, man. I don't even know. I don't even remember. Because I was such a Freddy kid that I came to Friday the 13th like later on. And I feel like I didn't even see the first one first. I think I saw the third one first. So I never knew what order they all went in because I just sort of caught them on TV or cable, like middle of the night kind of thing. I do remember at a certain point renting the first one and being very confused because there was no Jason in it. Which I think a lot of people who saw the first one later probably had a similar experience. So it wasn't like, oh, I fell in love with the first one and then followed the franchise. It was very unplanned and being like, oh, Friday the 13th Part 3 is on TV this Saturday night and my brothers and sisters are asleep. I guess I'll watch it. And so, yeah, it wasn't, I think, until I was a bona fide adult that I like bought the collection and watched them in order. Up until then, I watched them just as they were available. And I don't think I saw Jason Takes Manhattan until, like way later. Probably not until I watched them all in order. But I remember watching the first one at a certain point, renting it with my siblings. I remember, honestly, the only thing I remember about it was I was confused because I was looking for Jason, and I remember that Kevin Bacon got an arrow in the neck. That was the only image in my brain that stayed with me. And so, like my appreciation for Friday the 13th came much later once I did like buy the set and really dove in a much deeper way. But because as a kid, I was so obsessed with Freddy and then Michael Myers, Jason was the odd man out.
How interesting. Huh. So, Hunter, where were you with Friday the 13th franchise?
So I alluded to this a couple of episodes back where we were talking about Halloween 6, but like me coming up and everything like that, I was born outside of the 80s like slasher craze. So like growing up, like Jason and Freddy and Michael and everybody like that was just super commonplace. Like you saw them everywhere, whether that was Halloween decorations or costumes. Like I didn't really get to experience kind of the comeuppance of a slasher villain until like Ghostface. Like I was kind of like right at the right age where it was like, oh man, we're doing Ghostface now. He's pretty creepy. I don't like that guy very much. But like everybody else was so iconic that I was familiar with Friday the 13th, but it was one of those that I didn't actually delve into fully until my teens. Now, these were movies that constantly just kind of played. I'm trying to remember. Like, I think at the time when I was like kind of dipping my toe into horror, like the Chiller Network got a lot of play because they always did reruns of Tales from the Crypt, which is something I absolutely love. But with that, you got to see a lot of reruns of older horror films, and I'm pretty sure that was like my first like TV airing of Friday the 13th. But my first actual, I am fortunate enough to have seen a Friday the 13th movie released theatrically, and that was the remake from 2009. And that was the first one that I really got to sit down and enjoy. I was just the right age for it. And ever since then, I've been huge into Jason. Friday the 13th is my favorite of the three major slashers, and you probably always will be. There's something to be said just for, in my opinion, Jason has the best look to him. I watch the Friday the 13th movies the most, and it's a very close franchise to me. It's something that I've always loved and I'll continue to love ever since, kind of becoming familiar with who Jason is and what he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for me, I spoke same thing a couple episodes ago when we talked about Halloween 6. I talked about going to my friend Jesse's house and being able to watch horror movies there. And I vividly remember Friday the 13th Part 1 being the first horror movie in the slasher era that I ever saw. And it was probably in 1993, 94, 95. And there was something about the idea that people are getting killed in a secluded place. Other movies had done it, like Texas Chainsaw had done it. Halloween, it was in a town, which made it all the more scary. But Friday the 13th, something about this being trapped in the woods with nowhere to go and no one to help you just hooked me. And in 89, Part 8 had come out. And so if you think when Part 1 came out in 1980 and they got through 8 films by 1989, they were just cranking these out as quickly as they could because they could make money off of these movies with very small budgets. But they had this great lore that they came up with in the first movie and then the second film when they went a little supernatural with it. And a lot of people, Andrew, you said people are confused about how Mrs. Voorhees is the killer in the first movie. Jason's not in it. And I will tell you, as the first real slasher movie I ever watched, it blew my mind because I also was expecting Jason, because it's the mid-90s at this point, and everybody knows Jason is the killer in Friday the 13th. So when we got through, and my friend Jesse was like, oh, just wait. Because I kept saying, when are we going to see Jason? When are we going to see Jason? Like, when are we going to get the hockey mask? Because I just thought that's who Jason was, and he was going to be that way from the beginning. And when it's Mrs. Voorhees, it blew my mind. And I had this weird reaction to it where I, at first, was like, this isn't what I signed up for. And then when the movie ended, and he and I and our other friend Kyle was there, and the three of us talked about it, and Jesse explained why it's so good and that we had to watch Part 2 to then understand why Part 1 makes so much sense. It really blew my mind, which we then that same night watched, I believe that same night or maybe another night, we watched Part 2. But Part 1, Friday the 13th Part 1 is one of my all-time favorite horror movies because of the misdirection through the whole movie, and then you get that grieving mother who's just gone insane as the antagonist. And I think it's so smart how they did it and misled the audience for so long.
Mm-hmm.
That's my history with it. And then from watching Part 1 and then Part 2 pretty quickly after to really falling in love with Jason and his mom, I then wanted to gobble them all up. So pretty quickly in the time I watched this, 93, 94, 95, I watched all of the ones that had been released within a couple weeks time frame. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, it got very difficult to continue watching as each movie went on and on and on. But for a 14, 15-year-old, it still was fun. I still had fun watching them. And I wasn't thinking about truly how bad they were until I really sat down to think about each movie and compare them to the ones before.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as a teenager, you're focused like on three things. Two of them are probably attached to the lovely female actresses, and then you're also focused on the blood and violence, and like that's about
right.
it. Yeah,
and going all the way up to Jason Takes Manhattan, the blood and violence in this film is so weird. None of it is really shot in a way that you see it. Most of it is off camera, which is something they were doing in the late 80s with horror movies to get that rating that they really wanted and make it not a NC-17 or X. They did a lot of kills off camera, and they were in Jason Takes Manhattan, I feel they were very unsatisfying.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. The actress who plays the main character, I think her name is Jensen Daggett.
Yes.
She plays Rennie, the main character. And I said this, me and Hunter actually did a episode of Real Fans a few months ago where we talked about the entire franchise. And I'll say it again. I think she's the best part of this movie. I think she somehow, they lucked out and got someone who was actually really talented and charming for the final girl in this one. And then the movie around her is just very bad. But she went on to have actually a pretty good career after this. But she talked about Jason Takes Manhattan, and she said it felt like they were almost like the Disney Friday the 13th because it felt like the violence was so toned down and so much of it happened off camera. And the tone was just a little goofier. So it felt a little more like almost family friendly. But then at the same time, there's elements of it that's skeezier than normal. So it's weird because it's like it's almost the tamest installment, but also the skeeziest installment at the same time. It's really a bizarre combination of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so odd, the choices they made in this film, because like you said, they made it where the kills are off camera and the blood, when there's blood, it's like, it's not moving anymore. Nothing explodes or is gushing. It's just there. And then there's this scene where they forcibly shoot Rennie up with heroin. And it's just so weird.
Yeah.
How do you go from one to the other?
I've gone on the record and I've said that is my least favorite moment in the entire franchise.
I agree. Mine as well.
For a franchise that does have its to be frank, skeezy moments, just because you're watching these teenagers get it on and then get brutally murdered. But this is in its own separate ball field, and that is, I carry a lot of. I don't think resentment is quite the right word, but I really don't like that scene, and that scene alone brings this one very, very low in my overall rankings of the franchise. It's a little too much, and I don't understand, like you guys are saying, I don't understand where that comes from, because it tiptoes a fine line, but that is a not even a toe over the line. That is 2 whole feet away from the line. I don't get it.
Right. I completely agree with you. This movie, it would be probably a D+ in my head if that scene didn't happen, but that scene itself makes it an F. Yeah. I mean, it is so low in the franchise that it's not worth watching unless we're doing a podcast about
it. Well, and it's so weird because, I mean, yes, Hunter, like you acknowledge, all the movies have their moments. These movies, and I think it's what we called it on Real Fans, is it's horror movie junk food, and that's okay. Sure. It knows what it is, but we're all in on the fun. It's like the sex, drugs, and violence. It's a party that we have all agreed to be a part of, sure. And we're all in on that. But that scene is somehow just so much more mean-spirited and just feels like I didn't agree to that. Those teenagers, those consenting teenagers can get it on all they want and great, and I'll watch, and we've all agreed to that. But that scene, it just makes you feel gross.
Yep.
Yeah.
I am glad that both those guys die pretty quickly from Jason's hand, but it doesn't make up for it. Did you both know that Pamela Anderson and Elizabeth Berkley auditioned for the role of Rennie?
No.
I did not,
That
but
completely changes that character.
Yeah, what a different movie we would have got if it was Pamela Anderson in that role,
Yeah.
or even Elizabeth Berkley. Instead of Adderall, she would have been shot up with heroin.
she'd be so excited.
Jeez.
And the other actress that we got out of this film that is relatively well known is Kelly Hu, and I will say her death scene in the film is my favorite death scene in the movie. It's the only one that I think is actually fun to watch. And in these movies, it's you shouldn't always say it's fun to watch somebody die, but that's what you're signing up for, like Andy said, in these movies. And her scene when she's in the little discotheque part of the cruise ship, which I don't know about any of you, but that cruise ship, quote unquote, is way bigger once you get inside it than it is when you're looking at it from the outside.
Yes, it is.
Oh, don't get me started on the cruise ship. That thing drives me crazy. It's my least favorite part of the movie because
Yeah.
I'm supposed to believe that you're going to put a senior class on that janky, ugly, gross, rusty, unsafe thing and call it a vacation. Nobody vacations on a ship that looks like that. Like, it's so gross. And like, it's so obvious that the production got it for like super cheap or for free, or it was going to be condemned. And they're like, well, we'll use it to shoot this movie, but we have to pretend it's a cruise ship.
Yeah.
I love that it is my second favorite gross gangly like crew membership outside of Peter Jackson's King Kong.
Ooh, good call.
Yeah.
Good call. But I love the scene where she's running through the ship to get away from Jason. Kelly Hu is running through the ship to get away from Jason, and she winds up in the little discotheque, and there are all these mirrors around her, and Jason is there, but he's there, and she doesn't know where he is because of the lights and the music, and I think it's just a cool scene, and it's actually probably the scariest one in the film, even though it's not really scary at all. But I like.
I just like that there is a disco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The disco,
like
is
one
the
last
size of the upper deck of that ship, even though it's only a room.
right.
I gotta say, I love the image of Jason holding a flying V guitar before doing a beheading. Though. Like that
is pretty
that
cool.
is like the highlight of the movie, to be honest. And Andy, I think we mentioned it when we did our retrospective, but like people always talk about that boxing scene, but like the boxing scene goes on forever. It feels like you kind of forget how long it is.
These are combos keep the feet light. This is it. Your best shot. Motherfucker.
until you watch it again.
Yeah. The one thing when I think about Jason Takes Manhattan, and it's probably the same for everybody, because Andy, you even mentioned it before we really got started with this podcast, but the one thing I always remember is Jason punching his head off on the roof and it flying down and going into the dumpster. Like, that's the one part of this movie that has stuck with me since the mid 90s. And rewatching it yesterday for this, it kind of, rekindled some of the scenes that I remembered. And that's why I was like, oh, Kelly Hu, I remember this. And I remember the scene. And I think this is pretty cool. But it also brought up a lot of that negativity, like the heroin, like the guy that's in the sauna for some reason that's on this cruise ship and gets that rock put into his chest, but you don't see it. And then Jason's holding it and it's not burning his glove at all. It's just very, very weird and not earned.
Well, and at this point, I mean, Friday the 13th was constantly trying to top itself with over-the-top kills at this point. Like, they embraced that portion of the franchise, and so that's where you get something that doesn't make any logical sense. But yeah, like the sauna rock right through a dude's chest. Like, there's no way it works. That's not how physics works, but whatever, the head punch. The head punch is my favorite kill in it. It looks fake. It's ridiculous, but I came to Friday the 13th for ridiculous. Right. It's different than when we talked about Halloween, where it's like, Halloween, I come to be truly scared. Friday the 13th, the more over the top, the better. That's fine. Right. I'm into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. How ridiculous is it that it's called Jason Takes Manhattan and they're in Manhattan for a total of like 13 minutes or something like that?
Oh man. That's the most infamous thing about Jason Takes Manhattan. I mean, and that's what everybody points to of being like, oh, it's terrible because it's an hour and a half movie. And for, the first 70 minutes, you're just on this boat. And so everybody jokes, it's Jason Takes the Boat. That's what it is. And it's true. Like, it's insane. And especially because, like, in this movie, Manhattan it's really one dirty alley in Vancouver.
Right.
And then 5 seconds in Times Square. And that's it.
Yep. And then in what's supposed to be the sewers, where it seems in the late 80s, they were dumping toxic waste in every night.
I mean,
yes,
look,
obviously every night it's on the schedule, right? So got to get out of here. Here comes the nightly toxic waste.
I mean, we all know that there's oversized rats in the sewers of New York and alligators that live down there, but I guess this is where they came from, the toxic waste that goes through the sewers every night in the 80s.
I mean, originally the next one was going to be Jason versus the Toxic Avenger. Like, that was the plan.
They're like, you know what? Freddy doesn't want to play New Line Cinema. Boy, do I have a backup. But, like, don't you guys love that it's not only toxic waste in the sewers, it is like the 10 Commandments flooding scene
right.
of horror movies in the sewers of Manhattan every single night. It's pretty crazy.
Yep.
So I will say, for like our complaints, and which there are a lot about this movie, it did give us one of the most iconic shots, I think, of 80s slashers, which is Jason standing in Times Square. Now, it is like one shot, like it's nothing to write home about, but like that is a really cool image to see somebody like that in a place like Manhattan.
Yeah. I have talked on other podcasts about where I grew up, and I'll just bring that up again. I grew up in New York. And, until I was 10, we lived in the Bronx, and I got to go to Manhattan all the time. And even when we moved away from the Bronx, we were still only an hour train ride from the city. So I was in the city nonstop. And to think that I was going to see a movie about Jason in Manhattan, I was pumped for it at 14, 15 years old. When I saw all the different titles for the movies after I saw 1 and 2, and I was like, okay, all right, I got to check these off the list, but I need to get to number 8. Like, I have got to watch the, I've got to watch The Final Chapter. I've got to watch Jason Lives, but I am, and A New Beginning, but I am getting to Jason Takes Manhattan, and I am excited for it. And what happened? He was in Manhattan for 5 seconds. And it wasn't
so
in Manhattan that I knew. I felt cheated, honestly. I felt like
that's a heartbreaker, man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's big old liars is what they are.
Yes,
That's what they are. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with you, Hunter. Like that moment is the best moment in the movie because guess what? That was the moment they promised us. And everything else was kind of a bait and switch, you know? And I love that they literally have like 5 locations in Manhattan, I say with air quotes, because Manhattan, like I said, it's the alley that was in Vancouver, it's that random diner, there's like an escalator, there's the sewer, and then there's Times Square, right? It's like 5 different locations. And it's obvious that when they shot those scenes, they were like, okay, just leave the camera running. We just want some footage of the location with nobody in it, with nothing going on. And then they just used all of those scenes like for the opening credits. And I'm like, so at the beginning, I'm like, oh, I already know all the 5 whole places we're going to get to see in quote unquote Manhattan because now you just showed it to me before we even get there.
Yeah, I mean, like, I also forget. I mean, like, I know you just made a whole valuable point about Manhattan being like B footage, but like, I forget how long the intro to this movie is. It feels like it takes like 5 minutes before the movie actually starts.
Oh yeah, it's they're on that boat and it just takes forever. The guy jumps out with the mask and you see Jason get electrocuted. It's just
so yeah, Andy, we talked about on that retrospective episode, but like the ending to this movie is just awful. Like I absolutely hate the ending and like how the finish off Jason in this movie is awful. Like there's no other way to describe it. Like I know I've said awful like 3 times, but just it is my least favorite like how do we get rid of Jason moment in the entire franchise.
Well, it is. It's really bizarre. It comes out of nowhere. It seems like they demasked Jason in almost every movie, and some of the looks I like, some of them I don't. But this one's probably the worst. And then he just magically transforms into a little kid, and you're like, what?
Well, the toxic waste.
Yeah,
it's just
toxic waste just dissolved all the big Jason off of him.
Yeah.
I mean, totally. And that's the thing is like, okay, it's terrible that it's called Jason Takes Manhattan and he's only in Manhattan for 5 minutes. Like, yes, but even if that weren't the case, it's still a bad movie. Like all of the weird illusions or whatever you want to call it. Like she's not hallucinating, but whatever the little ghostly illusions of Jason that she sees throughout the movie. Like, what is that?
And
like,
she's not the only one that sees it too. The dog can see it. So it's like, it's happening.
Right. Like, so it's really happening. So now Jason can haunt you with visions, like real visions. That's a new superpower he has. And like the terrible backstory about like she almost got drowned by Jason in Camp Crystal Lake, which doesn't make any sense because he wouldn't be there. And he certainly wouldn't be a little kid at that point to drag her under. Her stupid uncle. Like there's so much that's already bad about the movie that like the fact that you don't even get to go to Manhattan is just icing on the cake.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Andy mentioned that unmasking scene that happens in every movie. And like, this does have one of my least favorite small Jason moments in the entire franchise, which is when he's scaring off like those punk rockers in Times Square. And he just like lifts his mask and like they're oh man sorry and like they run away. Like that moment does not work for me at all.
Nope.
Like it's a little too. You expect me to believe Jason wouldn't just kill those teenagers? Like Jason doesn't care. He's in the middle of being surrounded by people.
Right.
He would just get rid of them. He's not going to lift his mask and be like, ooh, I'm the boogeyman.
And it's the same thing on the subway too. He would have just been killing everybody on the subway, not just walking after them.
Yeah.
And guess what? That would have been fun to watch.
Oh, yeah.
That's why we were there, is to see Jason go ham in Times Square or on the subway instead of just walking through and ignoring everyone because he's after Rennie for no apparent reason, except maybe he wanted to finish the job of drowning her that he started when he was a ghost baby. But like to see him actually like just cut loose in New York, you'd go, oh yeah, see, like now this is why I came. This is what I paid for.
I would take 5 minutes of Manhattan if all 5 minutes he was just plowing through people.
Right.
The one thing that this movie does, and I have a hard time with it, so I'm going to throw it out to you both, but it has that the killer, the slasher, can just randomly appear or catch up to the heroes way better than in any other movie before. And there are parts of the movie where I'm like, you need him to be behind this door now for the scare.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way he could have really gotten there. But when they're in Manhattan, it's even more accentuated because on a boat, maybe he could have found other passages or maybe there's other ways around. But in Manhattan, there's no way that they ran down the stairs into the subway and got on right when the doors were closing and then Jason's in the next car. There's no way.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot in Manhattan. They get out of the alley, they get out of the train and they get up to Times Square and she turns around and he's right there. Like, it's the most supernatural appearances of Jason in any of the movies. And I can't rectify in my brain whether or not I like that or it's so outlandish that it's just stupid and I don't like it.
I mean, you're right. And at the same time, like, how did he get from the boat to Manhattan? Did he just walk on the bottom of the ocean really quick? Because we know Jason can't swim. That's the one thing we know about Jason. The dude can't swim. So, like the fact that he like wandered on the ocean floor like Pirates of the Caribbean and caught right up to them. And again, I know it's a horror movie. He's got to get there. But like the fact that they were like, we don't care. He just gets there.
Yeah, the boat could have just been outside of New York. Why'd they have to get on the other boat and then float for seemingly a few hours? I don't know.
Right, exactly. Like there were ways to write it where it was easier on them.
Yeah, my high school senior prom, we rented one of those boats around Manhattan. So our senior prom was on a boat. And so all of us went on and got on this like drive around Manhattan cruise ship. Why couldn't they have just been on that? That would have been better and made more sense.
Right.
But anyway, I digress. The only other cool part about the movie, not even cool part about the movie, but cool part about Kane Hodder, who is Jason in this movie, is that I didn't know this until I was looking up facts about the film, but he can vomit on command. Did either of you know this?
Oh, what an interesting talent.
So in the movie, at the end of the film, when Jason is about to get, taken over by the toxic waste in the sewer, he, for no reason at all, looks back at the rushing water or rushing toxic waste at him and starts vomiting up water.
Mm-hmm.
That's Kane Hodder actually did that. He drank a gallon of water an hour before that shoot and then vomited it up.
That's dedication to the craft.
Well, I got to say that talent shows at Kane Hodder's high school must have been a blast.
Yes, indeed.
And I think it's that moment that like implies that Jason doesn't like water, which then factors into Freddy versus Jason. I think it's really that.
Yeah. So we needed Jason Takes Manhattan to get Freddy versus Jason.
Thank you,
I guess
Jason
we'll give it a
Takes
pass there.
Manhattan. Thank you.
All right, so I think we've beat this one into submission by knocking its head off of the roof of a building. So, Hunter, did Jason Takes Manhattan ruin what you knew about the Friday the 13th franchise?
I've spent 30 minutes just shitting on this movie, and now you're going to have me say, no, it didn't. With these movies, like we talked about it on that full retrospective, but with Friday the 13th, we just talked about Halloween, and with Halloween, you've got a legacy to live up to. You've got the original film, which is a masterpiece to live up to. With Nightmare on Elm Street, which in my opinion is probably the most consistent, like full horror franchise. You've got one masterpiece with the original film and then some pretty great films. And then, you got some crap because it's hard to. So with Friday the 13th, you know exactly what you're going in for. There's not going to be a perfect movie. You're just there to see some kills and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of lifestyle. And every one of those movies, I would say, except for maybe like the first two, kind of deliver on that. You have aspects there, but it really didn't hit its stride until a little bit later on. But anyways, there's not a perfect film in this franchise, and for that, I think it's a little easier to forgive some of the flaws of this movie. Now, if we ever talk about Jason Goes to Hell, fuck that movie. But everything else, I can kind of turn a blind eye to. This is not one that I'm going to be popping in my player very often. But if I'm doing a franchise rewatch, I don't have that moment of regret as I'm putting it in the player. It's like, okay, well, I've got to get through this one to do the franchise, but that's okay.
All right. So, Andy, did this movie ruin what you knew about the Friday the 13th franchise?
No, of course not. It's so funny because Hunter started the episode by going, "Oh, it's my favorite slasher franchise," and I started going, "It's my least favorite slasher franchise," and yet we feel exactly the same about the franchise. In like everything that Hunter just said, I completely agree with. In that, like, what I like about it is it's unpretentious, trashy fun. That's what I like about Friday the 13th. So I don't really hold it to a very high standard because I don't think there's a truly great movie in there. I think they're all varying degrees of stupid fun. And that's okay. That's why I go to Friday the 13th. So I feel like you can't ruin that because it's like this is one of the lesser installments. It's a pretty bad movie. I don't even want to say it's not good. It's bad. It is a bad one. But like, who cares? You know, like if you want to see Jason do his thing in a bad movie, like this will scratch the itch, I guess. It's never going to be the first one I reach for on the shelf, but like, whatever. I kind of can watch it in the same way I can watch any terrible 80s slasher movie. But like, I think the magic of the Friday the 13th franchise is just that. It doesn't have any higher aspirations to be great cinema. It's just trying to give you a cheap thrill for 89 minutes. And that's what this tries to do. I think mostly it fails, but that's okay. There are 7 that came before and plenty that came after that are going to scratch that itch a little more successfully than this one does. So it is what it is. It's one of the worst ones. It's not a good movie. It's a mess. It's all over the place. There are plenty of holes to punch into it. But like, whatever. They tried something new. It didn't work. That's fine. I'll watch Jason Lives.
Perfect. And for me, you both have said you know what you're getting with this franchise. And I agree with that. After Jason Friday the 13th Part 2. There's something special, and maybe it's truly because it was the first real slasher film I ever saw, but Friday the 13th Part 1 holds such a special place in my heart and in my yearly horror watching because I just love the subversion to Jason's mother, to Mrs. Voorhees. And it's not a great film. It is such B schlock. From the kills, from the way they cut things so that the hand stops moving before the machete comes all the way down. I'm like, it's not well put together, but it still holds such a great place in horror cinema that I love it. And when I think about all the places that Friday the 13th went after that, yeah, it's fun to get ridiculous and it's fun to just see Jason go off on killing sprees, but there's something about this movie that just hurt me. and maybe it's the Manhattan piece, maybe it's the ridiculousness of it all, maybe it's the heroin part. I don't know exactly which of all of those things it is, but it didn't ruin my childhood, but man, it made me not like Friday the 13th for a little while. Like, I didn't want to watch Jason Goes to Hell, and that's not a great movie either. And so it didn't really want me to, or make me want to keep watching Friday the 13th movies. But it didn't ruin my childhood. It didn't ruin the Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2 for me, but it definitely gave me pause. And that's a fault of the filmmakers and a fault of really just calling out that one scene in particular that I truly hate. In the alley in Vancouver / Manhattan.
It didn't just give you pause. It also gave Paramount pause because after this one, they're like, and we're done. You can have it, New Line Cinema. We're good.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. This was 89 and the next movie was 4 years later with a whole new studio. Hunter, where can people find you outside of this podcast?
Sure. If you want to keep up with me, the best place to do that is, actually on a couple different podcasts. If you like all things Disney, you can hear me and Andy on Disorder, every Disney film, where we're looking back at each Disney theatrically released animated film in order. If you like all things pop culture, but especially theme parks, you can hear me on Grim Grinning Hosts. And if specifically you like Halloween Horror Nights, you can hear me on the Catacombs of Halloween Horror Nights. And if you want to keep up with me personally, you can do that on Twitter at HanBrolo77. HanBrolo77.
Great, Andy.
Hunter just pitched Disorder to you, so we're good there. We also talked about Real Fans for Real Movies earlier on, where we did a Friday the 13th look back not too long ago. So yeah, you can check out that show as well. You can also check out Holy Batcast, all about Batman and the DC Universe, and then Why Not Futurama, where my pal Scotty and we are reviewing the entire series of Futurama episode by episode. All of those shows are at rf4rm.com, where you can search for them by name. And then you can find me on Twitter or on Instagram. It's just my name, Andy DiGenova.
Great. And for me, everyone can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Fildimo, Fildimo. You can also follow this podcast at podcastruined. And we hope that this look back at Jason Takes Manhattan didn't ruin your childhood.
Could it be I've misunderstood? This podcast ruined my childhood.
Somebody please go!
Living in the city ain't no big deal. Living in the city ain't no big deal. You gotta have a heart made of U.S. steel. If the crack don't get you, then the hookers will.
You a dead meat slime bag! Yo, man, it's cool. It's cool, man. It's cool.
But I still wouldn't describe that as a perfect film. It's a excuse me, I almost vomited on command. It's a very